Okay, so I'm going to kick off with the presentations and then we will take questions afterwards. So I think the first one is, have a look. Okay, so let me click play.
Hi everyone, welcome to ARCOM Conference 2021.
Okay,
I'm glad to be here with you today. My name is Thao. I'm a second-year PhD student at the School of Built Environment, Massey University in New Zealand. My PhD research is to better understand the decision-making towards zero-carbon refurbishment for New Zealand's existing buildings. And today, I'm happy to present one of my studies as part of the PhD research titled Towards Zero Carbon Building Refurbishment, a New Conceptual Framework for Decision Support Tools. The co-author of this paper are Professor Suzanne Wilkinson, Dr. Niluka Domingo from the School of Built Environment, Massey University, and Dr. Casimir MacGregor from the Building Research Association of New Zealand. Now let's get started. There are 5 main focuses in this presentation that I would like to cover today. Firstly, I will give you an overview of the research context, including the research background and literature review. Secondly, the research objectives and methodology will be outlined. Then we'll go through some of the key findings and the discussion. I guess that all of us must probably know 2 phrases, climate change and global warming, as we may hear about this on a daily basis. So why do we need to limit global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees and achieve net zero carbon by 2050? This is because the negative impacts of global warming level of 2 degrees are anticipated to exceed the coping capacity of particularly vulnerable nations. For example, Vietnam, my home country. If you could open the climate change map and look at the South Vietnam, you can see that if we continue doing business as usual, the entire area will disappear in 50 years' time. Therefore, reducing carbon emission to mitigate climate change impacts is very important globally, particularly in the building and construction sector, which contributes to around 1/3 of the total global greenhouse gas emissions. Here's the net zero carbon targets for buildings proposed by the World Green Building Council. By 2050, all buildings will be required to be net zero carbon in operation. Internationally, there are many terms that could broadly categorize as zero carbon buildings. However, in this research, we consider the concept of zero carbon building as the maximum reduction of operational and embodied carbon throughout the whole life cycle of the building. And the building refurbishment, according to this concept, is called zero carbon refurbishment. In the context of zero carbon refurbishment, why do we need a decision support tool? There are a few reasons. Firstly, making decisions about building refurbishment that integrate net zero carbon target is more difficult. Therefore, we will need to provide mechanisms and approaches that can support decision makers who are building professionals to make more informed decisions. Secondly, there's a limited number of simple and holistic decision support tools that can address zero carbon problems. As most of the tools were designed for sustainable building renovation, which is not specifically for zero carbon aspect. Here we come to the research objectives after identifying the research problem and motivation. This study aims to examine the state-of-the-art decision support tools for building refurbishment in early design stages, and to determine lessons learned, as well as to propose a new conceptual framework for the future development of zero-carbon refurbishment decision support tools. To achieve the research objectives, we chose literature review as a research methodology. A critical literature review was selected because it could assess, critique, and synthesize literature on the research context in a way that facilitates a new knowledge. In this research, we mean we would like to create a new conceptual framework for future zero-carbon refurbishment decision support tools. We start searching using keywords. We then found 160 papers. It is important to note that in the research scope, we include only top-ranking journals and conferences papers in the construction field. After examining 80 papers, by reading abstracts to confirm relevances to the research scope, final selection include 15 state-of-the-art decision-making tools for reviewing. Turning to the research findings, we firstly reported the applicable areas of decision support tools in two aspects: building location and building types. Looking at those figures below, you can see that most of the tools were designed and developed in European countries. The considerable attention has been paid for residential building sector compared to others. In terms of methodology, there are quite a few number of methodologies that has been used in developing decision support tools, including soft system and hard system methodologies. Regarding the functionality of the decision support tools, we found that most of the tools focus on generating and ranking refurbishment solutions and evaluating the economic benefits. We also found that there's a lack of simplified tools used by non-professional decision makers. Social issues have remained on the fringe of the mainstream practice compared to environmental and economic aspects. There is a lack of construction stakeholders and end-user perspectives consideration in decision-making process. The findings from the critical review lead to several lessons learned for development of the new decision support tools for zero-carbon refurbishment. Firstly, we should set the right goal. Construction stakeholder and end user involved in the early stages should be considered, as well as defining the climate change target and carbon budget. Secondly, we should establish towards zero carbon refurbishment strategies, for example, setting the carbon reduction targets and developing a long-term strategy for refurbishment. Thirdly, user-centered refurbishment process should be considered. For instance, co-benefits and level of user dependency. Finally, there's a potential for integrating incentive schemes. It's important to note that decision support tools are not only to support decision makers, but also encourage and drive them to move towards zero carbon future. The research findings and discussion are enabled to generate a new conceptual framework for future zero carbon decision support tools. I would like to emphasize again, we should consider the goal setting in early stages. And at these stages, we should consider the value of construction stakeholder and the end user, as well as define the climate change targets and carbon budget. In conclusion, the paper investigates the up-to-date application of decision support tools for building refurbishment. We reflect a new understanding of decision support mechanism for zero carbon refurbishment and propose a new conceptual framework and theoretical implications for future development of zero carbon refurbishment decision-making tools. However, this study is limited to empirical data and lack of practical implications for specific building situations. Therefore, we suggest that future research should evaluate the proposed framework through the development and implication of case study in the local context. Here are some references for this presentation. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any question.
Hi, Patrick, are you there? Hi, Alice, can you hear me?
Yes, I am.
Patrick's there. Okay, well done.
Okay. Yes. So thanks very much, Thao, for the presentation. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. So thanks very much for your presentation. And so I'm going to open the floor to the audience for questions. So questions for Thao. Questions, please. It looks like we have a very nice audience for you this morning. Okay, I'll have a first go. Okay, so maybe that will provoke other questions from our audience. Okay, so Thao, thanks very much for your presentation. It's very interesting. And my question, is more focused on the methodology, or the methods you apply. Okay, so you for your review, you did say that you focused on top journals, right? Okay, yeah. So immediately you said that the question that came to mind was, okay, so how did you determine whether or not a journal is a top journal or it's not a top journal? Okay, so that's my question to you. So what criteria did you use to determine whether or not a journal is a top journal? You are on mute. I think you need to unmute. Is it possible to unmute? Okay, good. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. I can hear you now.
Cool. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much for your question. What are the criteria that I choose for the reviewing papers in terms of top journal ranking? So the paper was chosen in Scopus, and we include a criteria, which is we check the ranking of the journal in the Simongo journal and country ranking, as well as the Scopus ranking. Okay. So we include, for example, top ranking journal, for example, the building and environment, energy and building. So it's Q1 Q1 to Q2 for the reviewing.
Oh, okay. So your definition of top journals were the journals that were Q1, Q2 in Schimago, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Okay. So any other questions? I can see that Alex is burning.
Alice, can I ask you a question? A really interesting paper, and the development of decision-making tools is a very interesting subject. It's very complicated and it's evolving, and you very nicely put forward this sort of this conceptual framework in terms of the way that we need to look at decision-making tools in the context of zero carbon refurbishment. And out of that, you picked out social issues, didn't you, as an area of decision-making tools which has historically been very complicated to simulate. I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of handling social issues in your future ideas for a framework for a suitable decision-making tool.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And for me, I think, to the best of my knowledge, as I already show in my paper, so the decision-making tool in the past has not put social issue in order. For example, the end users and the value of the construction stakeholder has not been considered before. So in the future, in the decision-making process, we can improve that by addressing end user value in the early stage of the refurbishment project. For example, I would like to show an example from my PhD study. So one of the case studies that I'm doing, so there actually is refurbishment of the university building, and the university does consider end user in the early stage. So before the refurbish project, they did go and ask students and the staff what they would like to, what their aspiration and what they would like to include in the refurbishment project, and that includes the net zero carbon target for that project as well.
Okay.
And throughout the project, they engage end user who are students and staff, actually like engage them throughout the refurbishment process and throughout the decision making process that they make for that university building. So I think it's a good way to resolve the problem, the social issues.
Yeah, thanks. That's a nice illustration of how social issues are being taken into consideration and forming part of the decision ultimately. Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've got a question here.
Yes.
Jianfeng? Yeah.
Alex Patrick, can I just ask one simple question?
Yes,
so
please.
Alex, I see there's a figure that you show all the tools that you've identified from the literature review. My question is, did you try to identify the overlaps or the differences between these tools? Like, in what circumstances do you decide to use which one? Did you try to do that as well?
Well, so what I found is each decision support tool have a different function, which is applicable to the local context. So, for example, in Sweden, their local context will be different from the other country, such as Canada or Hong Kong, and it's different. It's applied to different type of building as well. For example, residential or office building. So I found it's quite interesting that most of the tools are all kind of ranking and choosing the solution and trying to optimize the and balance between criteria such as cost and social cost and economic and the environmental aspect. Yeah, but it's very variables. It's very various because it applies to the different contexts and different case studies.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, any other question for our presenter? Okay, it looks like no other question. Okay, so maybe probably I'll ask one last question before we go. And sorry for the noise. There are some builders, close to my house, and so they have noise around. Okay, so I'm just taking a quick look at your framework. Okay, and I realized that the framework says that if you don't want to refurbish, then you need to demolish. Okay, and so my question is, is that the only option? So if someone chooses not to refurbish, is demolition the only option available?
Well, it's an interesting question. However, my answer will be more linked to the refurbishment boundaries. So we call refurbishment. There's. So I will refer to my scope of this study about the refurbishment boundaries. So in this study, we consider refurbishment as include the construction process of adding the new materials and new structure or new construction products, as well as the end of life of the building that need to be refurbishment. Did you get what I mean, or?
Yes, I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it could be major refurbishment, or minor or partial refurbishment. And imagine if you have a building and it's end of life, you have only two ways to go. One is refurbishment, that maybe changing the structure or just recycle some of the material, or you have to totally demolish and build a new one.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, for that. Yeah, it's a very good presentation. Yeah. Thanks very much, Thao. It was nice. Having you. So we're gonna jump to our next presentation, and I'm pleased that Jianfeng is around. Okay, to take our questions when it's time to do so. So Jiang's presentation is titled "Value for Money Assessment for Procuring Infrastructure Project: A Review of the Practices in the Global Market." Okay, so I'm gonna press play, and then we will watch this nice presentation.
Hi everyone. It is a privilege to share with you some of my PhD work today. That is the state of the practices of value for money assessment in global markets. First, I'll talk about the basics of public-private partnerships and value for money, and the importance of value for money assessment in infrastructure procurement. Then I'll explain our research motivations and the research method we used to achieve the research aim. In the end, I'll present the research findings and recommendations. In terms of the definitions of PPPs, there are currently no consensus on what is a PPP. This is because when governments promote the use of PPPs, they have different intentions and priorities. For example, if we can look at the table, the UK and China, they seem to like to just have the project delivered, while Australia, they stress the service responsibilities undertaken by the private sectors. But overall, we think that PPPs took off in the UK in 1992, when the then Conservative government relaxed its regulation on privatization. Until now, there are more than 700 projects worth 56 billion in the UK now. In terms of the definition of value for money, the HM Treasury defines value for money as an optimum combination of whole-of-life costs and quality of the product or service to meet the user's requirement. This is also the most widely cited definition of value for money in terms of PPPs. Some institutions also use the 4 E's to represent value for money. Other studies cite technical innovation and competitive tendering. But in the end, cost effectiveness is identified to be the most fundamental driver of value for money. That explains why, when doing value for money assessment, cost is paid overriding attention. About the importance of value for money assessment in infrastructure procurement. So, the ex-ante value for money assessment can be used to determine a procurement routes between different options at the initial stage of a project. And then the ex-post value for money assessment relates to the performance measurement to check if the selected method delivered the value for money. And then some organizations such as the National Audit Organization in the UK, they use value for money assessment to scrutinize government spending. Now, given the large amount of investment associated with a project, if it's not successfully delivered, then the result will be the financial vulnerability of stakeholders and also the loss of overall social welfare. That's why it has become the legal process in some countries, for example, in the UK, Australia, and China. As for the research motivations, well, since UK has experienced some failures of PPPs and is considering the new form of private investment in its infrastructure sector, so that drives us to understand how the global markets assess value for money when considering PPPs, so that the UK can capitalize on in the future. To achieve the specific research aim, using grey literature, in our case that's government documents and existing research literature, we did a comparative analysis of value for money assessment between the UK, Australia, and China. We select these countries because they all considered to be the mature PPP markets around the world. We then frame our analysis to the government side of value for money assessment and the end user's interpretation of value for money. Moving to findings. So first, what is value for money in these three countries? As we mentioned, UK is about whole of life cost and service quality. Besides that, Australia adds risk transfer and China adds operation efficiency. So when is value for money assessment conducted? The UK does the value for money assessment in its latest Green Book. It says it should be conducted during the long list and short list appraisal stage. Australia and China, they both do the value for money assessment after the investment decision and before request for proposal. How they do that, the UK starts with a qualitative assessment, then the quantitative assessment, but the decisive role of quantitative assessment is criticized because it can be easily manipulated. And Australia and China, they do the quantitative assessment first, then a qualitative assessment. This is important because if a bidder's price is close to their benchmark cost, then they can use the qualitative assessment to make a further decision. When assessing the quantitative value for money, they mainly compare the net present value of a PPP and the traditional procurement method, or we call it a public sector comparator. The components of the PSC are not detailed in the UK's latest evaluation guideline. In terms of the discount rate, the UK obviously prefers the present time over the future, but that is somewhat contradictory to the PPP because the operation stage of a PPP usually lasts more than 20 years. And in Australia, the integration of a risk premium raises a concern whether the actual risks can be transferred to the private sector. And in China, the same discount rate used in the PPP and the PSC explains the reason why there is a lack of a sensitivity analysis during the value for money assessment process. And for risk pricing, in addition to the point estimate and Monte Carlo simulation that are used in both the UK and Australia, the UK also uses a decision trees method and real options to make a second decision during the project process. And then in China, based on whether the consequences and probabilities of the risks can be measured, they use 3 different ways to price the risks. As for the qualitative value for money, all 3 countries list their value for money factors based on their individual characteristics, but Australia, they didn't tell how these factors can be evaluated. In the UK, this is conducted through asking questions And in China, they use a somewhat quantitative expert evaluation. So they assign the weight to each factor and then ask the experts to rate the factor and then have a result to see whether this impact can be achieved through the project. Now, what are the takeaways from the comparison? First, we think a government-wide definition of value for money should be established, because the standard value for money definition will set the foundation for how quantitative and qualitative value for money should be assessed. Then we think that we should apply the value for money assessment to both PPPs and the traditional procurement if the intention is to achieve the best value for money for their taxpayers, because the current assessment only assess the PPPs, not the traditional procurement. Then we need to ally both the ex-ante and ex-post value for money assessment, because the consistent way of assessing value for money can reduce the possibility of manipulation and increase transparency. At last, in order to address the repetition in the process in the UK, we suggest the assessment starts with an option analysis approach, because not all projects are suitable for PPPs. Then we need to conduct a quantitative and qualitative assessment simultaneously to decide the final result. That's all for my presentation. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jianfeng, for your presentation. That was very interesting. So I'm going to open the floor, okay, for questions for our friend, okay? Any questions for him from the audience, please? Okay, it looks like we have a very silent audience this morning. Okay, so then I'll ask a question then. Okay, so yeah, my question is, because I'm sure probably you're aware of this, because in my university I teach project finance, and so I do touch on some of the things you've covered in here. Yeah, and I think not long ago, I think the current conservative government, they made a decision not to sort of like sign off any new PPP project. Okay, so I don't know where things are at the moment. Okay. Yeah, but my understanding is that the government doesn't intend to initiate any new PPP project. Okay, and so in view of this, okay, so what do you make of the future of PPPs in your personal view? What do you make of the future of PPPs within the UK?
Thank you, Patrick. You're absolutely right. The government has decided to not have any new PPPs in the future since 2018 in the UK. But I think that doesn't mean the private investment will disappear in the UK, because is it in 2018 or in 2019 the launching a private investment bank actually in the UK to promote private investment. So the reason they stopped to use PPP is because the performance of PPP is not satisfactory. So that brings us to think in the future, if there are any other forms of private investment, how do we select that? That's the core of value for money we're calling for. So we need to measure maybe not only the cost as that has been conducted with PPPs, maybe some other benefits or impacts that may bring to the society, or at least the population that has been impacted by that infrastructure.
Okay.
So in my view, I think that private investment will continue, but in another form, maybe not PPPs, but a different term.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, I guess my friend Alex will.
Yes. It's for me to ask the next question. Yes, I'd like to ask you a question about your methodology. You didn't cover it in much detail in your presentation. Could you just give us a little bit more in depth about the methodology, the methodological approach you took to drawing out these comparative factors between the three countries?
Right. Thank you, Alex. About the methodology, so I think it's a comparative study, but based on a literature review. So we when we do the literature review, we decide to select three countries, but with different and similar characteristics. So because only a small sample of comparative analysis, so the differences and consistencies can reflect how this differing bodies conducting value for money assessment. And then so the UK and Australia are widely considered to be mature PPP markets a long while ago. And then since 2014, when the government in China decided to officially launch PPPs, their markets, as I understand, is said to be the largest PPP markets in terms of the numbers of projects and the value. So I see some scholars now equate the maturity of the market of China's to the maturity of the Australias and the UK's. That's why we decided to select that three countries. And then after that, we used the government published documents on how their value for money assessment is assessed. Then using that sort of material, we do the analysis. And then in the absence of any material, we also referred to the non-material, the research papers, something like that.
Okay.
All right. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay. So, any more questions for our presenter? You can put your question in the chat if you like. I can't read.
Oh, we've got a hand up here from somebody. Who's this?
Yeah. So yeah, if you can promote the person to.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
I think it's just the panel and the presenters are asking questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello there.
Hello, Jianfeng. Actually, could you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Actually, I'm studying in the PPP.
Oh, we lost her.
Disappeared.
Okay, but we have another. Okay, it's fine.
Any problem?
Yep, you're back.
Oh, okay. The internet has a little problem. Actually, I'm research on the PPP projects in Chinese market, and I found that there are three different return mechanisms of the projects. I don't know whether you mentioned about that. And for my point is, I think the projects that based on the government-based return back mechanism, maybe the value for money assessment should be different, as this kind of projects just focus on the public welfare and maybe less profit for the construction company, and they need the government to put more money for the project. And my question is, what do you think about this problems, and is there any? Do you think the value for money assessment should be different for different kind of projects? That's my question.
Thank you. That is actually a very good question. So for my study, because on this paper, I'm presenting the general way of conducting a value for money assessment. But in my PhD, I'm doing the value for money assessment for the transport types of project. Obviously, the simple answer to your question is yes, there should be a different way of conducting value for money assessment for different types of projects. Like you just mentioned for the government paid PPPs, right?
Yeah.
Yes, for the government paid, and also there are these revenue generated types of PPPs. For these two types of projects, the focus and the emphasis should be different. Maybe like for the social types of infrastructure, the value should be the emphasis should be on the impact, while for the economic infrastructure, the focus should be on the revenue or the ability of the private sector to deliver the project and then to compensate for their investment during the initial stage throughout the project.
Yeah, thank you for the answer.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Yeah, thanks very much. It's been interesting. So let's move on to our third presentation, and then we will take our question from the audience. Okay. So moving on to the third presentation. Okay.
Hello everyone, this is my pleasure to provide this presentation about our research. Let me introduce myself briefly. My name is Liang Yingzi. I graduated from University of Melbourne to get my master's degree, and I'm now a PhD candidate in Tianjin University. My research direction is public-private partnership, infrastructure project management, and the relationship between the government and enterprises. So back to our research, it's about the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in infrastructure projects. For my presentation, it generally contains 5 parts. The first is the introduction, and then the literature review and hypothesis development. Data analysis, and next is the results and discussion. At last is conclusion. So let's begin with the introduction part. As we know, infrastructure is very important to guarantee the basic public demands, ensure the public welfare, and improve the economic growth. As the goal of the World Bank Group is to end extreme poverty, they generally funded many infrastructure projects in developing countries. However, the corruption is the main obstacle for the infrastructure development. Although WBJ improved the selection systems to anti-corruption continuously and published the desired forms of individuals annually, the reasons back of the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in infrastructure projects are still unclear. So, in our research, we aim to explore the basic reasons for the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in infrastructure. The next part is the literature review and hypothesis development. Clearly. So in our research, we aim to explore the basic reasons for the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in infrastructure. The next part is the literature review and hypothesis development. To prevent fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice, and to promote the things in infrastructure projects run smoothly, the control of corruption is important. There are a few researches about the control of corruption. And besides the good control of corruption, the regulatory quality also plays an important role in anti-corruption. For example, the governmental relation may affect a firm's corrupt practice, and the improvement of the regulatory quality leads to better electricity market. Also, the interaction between the control of corruption and the regulatory quality has been explored in many research, which means the regulatory quality and the control of corruption will affect the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice together, and the regulatory quality may enhance the control of corruption. Based on the previous researches, we developed the three hypotheses. There are control of corruption or regulatory quality is negatively related to fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in infrastructure projects, and the interaction between control of corruption and the regulatory quality is positively related to fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in infrastructure projects. The next part is the data and method. We collect the samples. We first collect the project information corresponding to the various forms or individuals by the World Bank. And we random selected the same number of the normal project samples from the World Bank project operations database. And these two parts generally consistent for our sample. And for the dependent variable is the fraudulent, corrupt, and the collusive practice. It is depend on whether this project its firm or its individual is debarred because of fraudulent, corrupt, or collusive practice by the World Bank Group. And for the individual independent variables, we selected the control of corruption and the regulatory quality from the World Bank governance indicators. And for the control variables, there are some other variables which might influence the fraudulent, corrupt, and the collusive practice, including GDP, population growth, starting of business schools, and the other governance indicators from the World Bank. For the method, we use the logistic regression model to examine the above hypothesis. For the section is whether this project, the form of the individuals of the project is debarred. And for the CC means control of corruption. And for the RQ is the regulatory quality. And for the X means the control variables. The next part is the results and discussions. In the table 2, we could see the regression results. From the column 1 and column 2, we could see that the control of corruption and the regulatory quality is negatively related to the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice. Therefore, the first of the hypotheses is confirmed. And we could say the last column, after it, the interaction between the control of corruption and the regulatory quality, they are also significantly related to the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice, which means the all hypotheses previously are confirmed. So, at last is the conclusion part. In this paper, we examine that fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in infrastructure funded by the WBG can be partly. At last is the conclusion part. In this paper, we examine that fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in infrastructure funded by the WBG can be partly explained through two governance aspects: control of corruption and regulatory quality. This research also analyzes that greater regulatory quality improves the control of corruption, and then promote the restraint of the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in infrastructure projects. This generally provides the suggestions for the WBJ to avoid or prevent the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice in the future. And there are also some limitations and further expectations of this sample research, such as small samples could be involved and to conduct the robust tests, and also other causes of the fraudulent, corrupt, and collusive practice could be analyzed from the enterprise's aspect, and maybe provide more constructive suggestions from the enterprise's factors. So this is all my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Well, we got the last slide. It didn't echo in the last slide, did it? But I think that was quite hard to hear in places for some people. But some people did manage to mute the video, I think, and just listen to the sound. So, Patrick, do we have any questions from the audience first? No questions? Can you hear me, Patrick? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, all right.
Yes. Okay, yeah. So yeah, questions from our presenters. So maybe can one of the first two presenters, if you want to ask a question, any of the first two presenters want to ask a question?
Yes, I just have one simple question. Can I ask, Patrick?
Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, are you going to explore how these three different corruption practices work in infrastructure projects? Like, what is their working mechanisms in the corruption?
Thank you for your question. Do you mean how I identified these three practices?
No, I mean how, like in your future research, are you going to explore how these three practices impact the project? How do they interact with each other or work separately to influence the infrastructure project's performance?
Oh, actually, this three practice is separated, and some company or individual is banned because of fraudulent practice, and some is corrupt practice. For your question, I think maybe we could just separate the samples for the projects.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions?
Can I just ask a general question?
Yeah.
Then, just obviously, researching into fraud and corruption has notoriously been complicated and very hard to take on, and you're very brave to do that. And obviously, you've had some excellent data from the World Bank Group to enable you to sort of look at the work that you're doing. But obviously, as you said in your conclusions, a lot of progress is really dependent on governments, isn't it? In the way that governments are getting to grips with public sector sort of fraud in procurement. Do you think the situation is getting any worse, or is it getting better? Or can you highlight examples of where governments are really getting to grips with fraud in their countries?
Actually, I think it's get better. I think the more this kind of practice is borrowed from the World Bank, and it can maybe let others know that this practice is banned. And actually, as I know more about this question in China, and in the end of the 1720, I think the government published a very strict law to stop some unregulatory regulatory projects, and after that, almost 20% of the projects have been stopped, and I thought this kind of things will be better. Is that answer your question?
Well, I think that's nice to finish on a positive note, isn't it? And yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Yeah. So yeah, I just have a question. Yeah. Yeah. To ask. Yeah. So did you consider? Because I know that Transparency International, they have, every year they publish what they call is it the corruption index? Okay. Yeah. And so I'm wondering whether whether you took that into account, in your analysis. For example, the countries that the project are from, whether you took into account the perceived level of corruption, in those countries, in your analysis.
Actually, we got this data from the World Bank. The World Bank only provides the banned list for the company or the individual, and we download the whole project database and to match the company and the individual for each project, and to find which projects have this kind of practice.
Oh, okay. No, but does the database show the country where the project was done?
Yeah. This is a problem for our research. I think we could improve it in the future.
Okay. Yeah, because I think it would be interesting because if you have data on the location or the country of the project. Yeah, then maybe another variable you could take into account is the perceived level of corruption, in those countries, and then get data from Transparency International. Okay, maybe and use that as another variable. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for your suggestion.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks very much, all of you. It's been a lovely Monday morning, and thanks to my colleague here, Alex Coppin, and to all our presenters and people in our audience. It's been lovely having you join us this morning. Okay, so we'll bring our session to a close. Okay, so I'm going to stop the presentation, and then we will, I guess, we'll be, take us back to the general area,
to the lobby. Yeah.
To the lobby. Yeah. And then we can make our way to the other sessions. Okay, so thanks very much for joining us. And you have a very great day, okay?
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, everybody. Well done.